presented by Secure Digital Markets. For those of you new to the show, basically every week here at Secure Digital Markets, we take a look at many factors impacting the market. These factors can range from anywhere from macro economic problems all the way to geopolitical problems. At the same time, too, we take a look at a lot of charts and not just crypto related. So if you're new to Secure Digital Markets, we're one of Canada's largest crypto OTC desks. However, we service clients internationally and not just limited to Canada. If you're looking to trade the top 50 coins by market cap, you can come to us and we can guarantee you the ability to have better execution, white glove service, and ideally just talk crypto with you. So I do want to jump into today's video. I think that there's a lot going on in the market that I want to discuss. So, I think the first thing that we want to take a look at here is Bitcoin. Okay, so there's a lot to obviously talk about with the price of Bitcoin. I do want to highlight a couple key points because I think that they're extremely important for what's going on in the market. If you've been watching the market here, you know that we just recently broke out. Okay, so right, let me just go ahead and kind of show you this. So, we've kind of been in this downtrend, right? And then you can kind of see that downtrend has recently been broken. Okay. So a lot of people are kind of flipping bullish here. At the same time, too, I do want to highlight that even though people are flipping bullish, there is still reason to be cautious. Okay. So why do I say this exactly? So what are the factors really impacting this? One of the first things I do want to talk about is obviously this market is very headline driven. There's a lot of geopolitical factors impacting it. But purely from a technical analysis perspective, I do want to highlight that there are several factors that are pretty important. So the first factor I want to talk about is I want to go ahead and discuss some of the moving averages. Okay, so we're going to take a look at a couple moving averages here. I want to take a look at both the 50 and the 200-week moving average. Ideally, Bitcoin has traded very closely to these moving averages, and I'm going to explain to you what I mean. So you can see here that the moving average for Bitcoin 50-week is roughly 96,000, and at the same time too, you're seeing the 200-week moving average is roughly 60,000. So 59,947. So you can also see the EMA close here. I don't really think that this is important, so I'm just going to go ahead and hide that. It's just too much of a distraction. Okay. So, all the way back to 2021 and 2022, there's a couple of factors that really played out here. So you can kind of see that in this range here, right, in this range, somewhere around here, right, sorry, let me just go ahead and erase this. So somewhere around here, kind of see what had happened. So I'd say early March, right, you saw the news of the Fed kind of hiking interest rates, and you saw how Bitcoin kind of reacted as it broke down below that moving average, right, that 50-week moving average. Bitcoin did, several things in place here. One of the first things it did, even prior in 2020, is it kind of followed the 50-week moving average. Went all the way here, up here, here, kind of retested on July of 2021 up until December, November of 2021. Obviously, we saw some pressures here from the Fed hiking. Right, hiking was expected to start of summer 2022. That's when the market kind of bottomed. But, at the same time, you could kind of see how Bitcoin reacted in December of 2021 as, sorry, just give me a second. Right, you can kind of see how Bitcoin kind of reacted on December of 2021. Right? So Bitcoin kind of went, below that moving average, and then it started to kind of cascade down. From here, we kind of tested up. We wicked on the week, slightly above. We didn't really close, and then all the way down. From here, we went below the 200-week moving average, and it was a great time to buy. Obviously, you saw FTX, so Bitcoin at the same time too also went 30% below that level. From here, we crossed back above the 50-week moving average, and here was a great time to buy, right? Bitcoin going above that 200-week moving average started the bull run, from whatever it was, like March of or 2023, early 2023. Okay. So Bitcoin did a great job, kind of stayed above and below, but kind of more so back and forth between the 200-week moving average. Ideally, Bitcoin did a great job respecting the 50-week moving average as it went all the way up. Here you can kind of see what had happened on November of 2025. So, October 31st, October 30th area, September, right? You saw Bitcoin kind of top out here, and then a couple weeks later, the NASDAQ kind of topped out. So Bitcoin went down below, right, that 50-week moving average, and then we kind of cascaded down here. So the argument that took place here was a couple things. So I think it's easier to show it on the day, but you kind of see two things happening here. So Bitcoin, still below that 50-week moving average, did get close to the 200-week moving average. Not exactly quite there yet, even though that we touched roughly 59,000 and some 100 whatever. Bitcoin ultimately didn't go below, right? And now it's on its way back up. A lot of people are saying that Bitcoin still has room lower to go. You see people with estimates anywhere from 60,000 all the way down to 40,000. The reason people say this is similar to last cycle. A lot of people are basically driving forward, but at the same time, too, right? They're driving while looking at the rear view mirror. The reason I say this is because they're trying to draw a lot of similarities to what happened last cycle. And the truth is something to keep in mind here too. Bitcoin didn't really top on euphoria. And that is a major difference from what we saw in the last cycle, right? So there's a chance that we don't need to go as low as possible, right? You still have that all the ETF flows, macro liquidity expansions, something to really consider too before we take a look at the 100-day moving average. If you look at what happened in 2022, right? You can see the NASDAQ corrected 35%. Okay. That's something to really keep in mind here, okay? Because at the moment, if you take a look at the NASDAQ, right, we just had one of our strongest corrections since 1982 in the S&P. From December 2021 up to the summer, November-ish 2022, NASDAQ went below its 50-week moving average, all the way down to its 200-week moving average. NASDAQ has done a great job respecting that 200-week moving average. You can kind of see the trend here, right? So this was a significant time to be buying, right? This is kind of like the easy money behind it, right? At the same time too, NASDAQ has also done a great job. So in deep corrections, you can kind of see NASDAQ basically retests its 200-week moving average. You saw a correction here in 2018, and then you saw a correction here 2020 with tariffs. You saw a correction here with the Fed hiking, and you saw the tariff dip, right? And then you saw the whole problems going on with Iran, right? At the same time, too, you can kind of see, right, there's only a couple times where you broke below that 50-week moving average. Market is very different at the moment. NASDAQ is at all-time highs. Something to really consider at the moment, right? Obviously the market is still very driven on these macro, headlines. Sorry, not macro headlines. It's very headline driven, right? So that's kind of something to consider too. Going back, looking at Bitcoin, you can kind of see that it has been diverging away with respect to the moving averages. However, right, just something to keep in mind, the market is very different. When we dropped 72%, 75%, maybe 78% last cycle, NASDAQ also dropped 35%. Okay. A lot of people really, expecting the NASDAQ to go a lot lower, S&P kind of go towards the 600, the 580 area, but that just did not happen. Okay. Especially as we move forward and we take a look at the 100-day moving average, Also something to keep in mind here with the 100-day SMA, right? With respect to the 100-day moving average, Bitcoin, for the record, has done a great job above the 100-day moving average, and you can see that trend is really respected. Again, we talked about this in 2023, kind of seeing us kind of like retesting. So, for respect, you can kind of see again. Earlier we just talked about that downtrend that we respected, right? And then you can kind of see what the market is doing here. Ultimately, you can see that Bitcoin closed above on the day, above that 100-week moving average. Not to say that Bitcoin can't close above the 100-day moving average and still be in a downtrend. In fact, I do want to highlight a very important point here. Even though Bitcoin was going lower from that November last cycle, what we did see was a bear market rally. We saw this bear market rally take place on January 2022, and Bitcoin rallied 44%, right? That was from the 33, and then with respect to the 100-day moving average, right? Kind of see at the same time too, Bitcoin went up, like 14%, 13%. So, taking those levels in respect, if you want to go ahead and overlap some of the similarities here, right? You can kind of see that would take us all the way up to 85,000, right? Especially if we're going to do something like this. So you can start to hear and see a lot of people calling for the 80s to take place. So, right, even if we do go all the way up to that level, right? Let's say that we do go up to 85,000 that we just talked about. With respect to the 50-week SMA, that would take us, probably would pull back somewhere here, especially if we do it a little aggressive, right? And then you can kind of see still around, that, right, 50-week. It's still on that 50-week moving average. It's still around 96,000. So again, that's still some room to go, right? It would still be trading at that time maybe 10 to 12%, because obviously, this is going to start to come down, whatever, it's going to be trading closer. So again, obviously, like, the market is showing signs of relief. I do want to say that this market is a lot different from the market that we saw in 2022. Okay, things are a lot different. I know a lot of people are trying to draw parallels, and especially, right, because I know a lot of people, were saying that, you can get similarities between kind of like what's going on here at the same time too, right? So it's like, whatever, right? Especially if you have a pattern like this, and then you can go ahead and try to overlap some of that pattern, right? Kind of see, and a lot of people were like thinking that something like this, possibly could play out, right? So it's the same idea that you're getting a pattern, more or less similar to what you're seeing here. So in this case, if Bitcoin breaks out of this range, right, that it's currently at the moment, you can see an explosive move upwards closer to that 85 range, right? That 85 range would still be below that 50-week moving average. So obviously, just like some levels to keep in mind, and I think that there's some strategies in place. Like, obviously, I don't know, like, if you want to be risk averse, you can kind of trade up the range to 85, then you can buy some puts, some protected puts if you don't want to sell your position, right? Obviously, if you're a long-term long-term bull, obviously, like, it's just another day in the market, right? If you just zoom out and you kind of just look at whatever happened last couple of years, right? I don't know, it's just another day in the world of Bitcoin, right? So kind of see for the most part, right? I guess, once you kind of overlap this, kind of looks like just another day. So Do we break down? There's a possibility. But I do think, especially if things do get better, if the situation in the Middle East does not accelerate, if all is well, I do expect Bitcoin to retest that $85,000 range. From the $85,000 range, to get a restart, the bull market, right, and some more explosive growth, upside, you would need to see Bitcoin break above the 50-week moving average. Again, just some levels to keep in mind. I do want to say thank you so much for watching this video, right? There's obviously a lot to keep your eye out for. For anybody who's watching the market closely, again, these are some reference points. In no way, shape, or form does the market have to behave like this. Especially again, if any headlines come out, situation in the Middle East worsens and the price of oil goes up, you can see some more inflationary pressures, and the Fed basically loses the ability to cut anytime in 2026 if that inflationary pressure goes up. So from a pure technical standpoint, this is what we look at. But again, markets are macro driven, right? Liquidity expansions, ETF flows. There's so much more to it than just technical analysis. So I do want to say thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to comment, like, and follow. Thank you so much.